Today, I have some stories to tell you guys about some of the more interesting interactions I've had of running a retro video game store. In the background, you'll just see us testing games, and right now you'll see us cleaning games, so basically just day-to-day tasks that are going on at the store. If you use the discount code YouTube10, you get 10% off of your order at our website at retronextdoor.com. We try to have our video game inventory uploaded to our website. We're still in the process of uploading all of it, but here you can see some of our 64 stuff. We're not skimping out on our high-end stuff, but yeah, YouTube10, you'll get 10% off your whole order. It really does help the store, and we appreciate it a lot. So for the first story, we're going to start off with probably one of the most interesting ones and one of the ones that had me like the most speechless throughout the whole interaction. When this story took place, I want to say it was around November, December time. I want to say that just because I remember it had been getting dark pretty early, and I remember it wasn't so late when these people walked into the store. It wasn't like 7 p.m. and I was getting ready to get out of there. So I want to say it was like around probably November, December, January time. And so it's probably around like 5 p.m. I'm there by myself. It's been a pretty slow day, and I remember these two girls walk in, and they came in with a bag. Whenever I see someone walk in with a bag, I always kind of assume, oh, okay, they want to sell us some video games. So when they walk in, I just kind of want to cut to the chase. You know, I know they want to sell. I want to just finish up the whole transaction ASAP. So I'm like, oh, you got some stuff you want to sell? She's like, yeah, I got some like PSP and PSP games I want to sell. I was like, okay, for sure. And so I started taking all the stuff out of the bag, and usually in like interactions with this, when it seems like it's not someone that's too into video games, I always like to ask them. I'm like, oh, so like what's the story on this? You know, just because as like a used video game store, our city does require us to like kind of make sure that the stuff's not stolen. And if the story is just so like sus or weird, I'm just like, I'll probably hold off on it. So I asked the lady, I'm like, so like, yeah, like what's the story on this? And she tells me like, oh, these were like my ex-boyfriends, were broken up now, so I just want to sell these. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, like, are you sure that he's not gonna be like looking for these? Because I was like, I didn't know if she like took them from him and was wanting to sell them, you know, like I was just kind of like making sure I covered my bases and made sure there wasn't someone who these items belonged to that like basically had them stolen. She was like selling them off, so I wanted to make sure of that. And so I was like, yeah, like, I mean, is he gonna like be looking for these? And then she was like, well, he's in jail, so probably not. And I was like, well, what about like after he gets out of jail? And you know, in my head, I'm like, man, I don't really want to deal with someone that's like been in jail, you know, like I don't want that kind of person like getting all mad that I have his video games. And so I like ask her, I'm like, is he gonna be looking for these when he gets out? And she's like, well, probably not, because he's getting deported. And I'm like, you know, I'm just kind of like, man, where this conversation took a weird turn, you know, like I'm just kind of like, okay, I did not expect that kind of answer, but all right, let's roll with it, I suppose. So I'm kind of just like making small talk with this, so it's not just like completely awkward the whole time. And for some reason, I was like, yeah, this is a good idea. Let me ask her why her ex-boyfriend is in jail and getting deported. And so I asked her, and she was like, well, he kind of tried to like unalive me. And I was like, huh? I was like, what do you mean? And then she was like, well, he like tried to put like sugar in my gas tank. And then she like went on to tell me like about what kind of car she had, and that like definitely upset her. I don't know what putting sugar in a gas tank did, but she seemed to really express that it was very bad. So I will assume that it was very bad and not just made up. But I was just like, oh, okay. She's like, yeah, and there's like a lot of other stuff. And I was like, okay, interesting for sure. At this point, it's probably already one of the weirdest like trade slash cash out interactions I've had. And I'm just like, man, I don't really know what to even say at this point. But for some reason, I just kept talking to her. And at some point, the girl that was with her, which I think I later found out was her sister, mentioned something about a kid. And I remember when these like girls had walked in, I was just kind of like, these girls look like awfully young, you know, they look like they're like 18, 19 years old. And so when I heard the one whose ex-boyfriend was in jail had a kid, I was like, you had a kid? And she's like, yeah. She's like, I got 2 of them. And I was like, dang, I thought you were like 19 years old. And she's like, oh no, I get that a lot. And I was like, okay. And for some random reason, I was like, I need to know. And I was like, hey, just like out of curiosity, is the father of your children the one that's in jail? And she was like, oh yeah, that's him. Honestly, at this point, like, the interaction is just like so bizarre for me, because I'm like, well, it kind of is my fault for continuing to ask questions. But I remember I just had no idea how to reply, and I was just kind of like, dang, I was like, that's kind of messed up that he's gonna like not even be in your like kid's life. And she was like, well, I'm the one that wants to get him deported because he's like so bad to us. And I was like, okay. I was like, okay, my bad. I was like, I'm very sorry to hear that. And she was like, yeah, he like tried to unalive us one time. He pointed a water gun at me and my kids. And I was like, whoa, okay. for sure, definitely not like the best father figure to have around your kids. And I was just like, damn, I really need to stop asking these goddamn questions. So basically nothing eventful after that happened. Honestly, like I probably did not do the best at just like articulating how bizarre this whole interaction with them was, because like the whole time I was just kind of like awkwardly laughing and be like, oh, like it was just like so it was just because I kept like digging myself deeper and deeper, and it was just like, man, like I really should learn what questions and not to ask to make this whole interaction like 10 times worse. But eventually, like, I tell her the price. She wasn't so happy about the price because she ended up buying the video games off of like Amazon. We all know Amazon is like #1 taxing website. And I think she had literally bought some of them brand new too, which, you know, that's even a double whammy. So we couldn't really agree on a price, and I was just like, I'm not sure if I necessarily accurately depicted like the extent of how awkward and weird that story was. Like I'm sure I missed so much stuff just because of like, I don't know, it was like so long ago at this point. But for the next, to preface this, like I had no like bad idea or feelings towards him before any of these situations, and these situations are entirely like why I completely hate dealing with him. But let's get into it. So early on into my store, this guy walked in and he showed up with a bunch. Well, basically he like first called my store because my store is like super confusing to find if you haven't ever been there. And so I basically am like, oh yeah, like I can go outside and I can find you. He's like, oh, I got a bunch of stuff to sell. Like, can you help me bring it in? And I was like, I just opened my store. I'm here so on and sell a lot of stuff. I'm like getting kind of excited because like inventory at the beginning of this store's life was like the thing I was most stressed about. So I was like, yeah. You know, I was like super amped up. I go to help him like bring in these totes and stuff, and it's literally one of the worst trade-ins I've ever seen in my life. It's literally all sports games, all Call of Duties, and it's like so many of them. And I do the same thing. I like ask him, I was like, what's the story on this? And he's like, oh, like I bought this storage unit. I'm a big storage unit guy, and I just got all this stuff, and the storage unit's got way more video games than this. He's like, it's got boxes and boxes and boxes of video games. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like trying to be hopeful for it, you know, like I'm like, okay, let's like build this relationship. I'm gonna buy his dog games that are all just sports games and Call of Duties and Assassin's Creed. Hopefully later on he will bring me some good stuff because he's got this storage unit. He starts asking me, he's like, yeah, so like how do you know what games have value? And I start telling him like, well, you know, like sports games usually don't have value, but if you look into like if you have Nintendo GameCube games, those are usually going for like a bit more. I just like tried to instruct him on like how to find stuff that was worth more, like what stuff he has is worth more. He's like, yeah, I think I've got like boxes of GameCube games. I was like, okay, you know, like I'm thinking this is going great, you know, I'm gonna get some crazy deals. And eventually he's just like, yeah, but just like, I don't think I can bring it to your store. Like, what if you come meet me at my storage unit? And like I said, at this point, I'm just stressing for inventory. I'm like, yo, whatever. Like, I will go to a storage unit if it means I can get some like crazy inventory for my store. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I get his info. And we're like, okay, yeah, today after work, you can come meet me there. And I'm like, okay, for sure. So after work, I head to the address that he gave me. I start calling him. I'm outside of the storage unit facility. He never shows up. I'm like, I'm calling him, I'm texting him, like, hey, well, like, where are you? Are you coming? Like, are we canceling? And he's just like, oh yeah, you know, like, I just had to get my kid from my football practice. I'll be there in like 10 minutes, you know. I'm waiting. 20 minutes goes by, 30 minutes, 40 minutes goes by. The dude completely stops replying to me. He doesn't answer phone calls. I'm just like, bro, what? I'm like, bro, if he was busy, he could have just told me, like, never mind, like, I can't do it today. So I was like, why in the world, like, would he just like stand me up like this? It was just like very bizarre to me. And the next day he comes into my store and he's like, hey man, I'm so sorry about yesterday. He's like, sorry I couldn't show you the storage unit, like something came up, but he's like, today after work I can show it to you, I promise. And I'm just kind of like rolling my eyes at this point. I'm like, I'm not sure if I really want to like trust this dude at this point. I think he's just gonna waste more of my time. But like I said, I'm desperate for inventory, so I'm like, okay. So I go to a storage unit after work. Guess what? Doesn't show up. And I'm just like so fed up at this point. I'm just like, man, this dude is literally just a compulsive liar. I don't know what's wrong with him. I doubt he even has a storage unit filled with video games. Like, I feel like he's literally just like yanking my leg, or he knew his sports games were absolute dog and he was just kind of like saying all that stuff so that I would buy it off of him with the hopes of getting like better stuff later. But he has my phone number. Like I said, we've been texting, we've been calling every time he's just stood me up. And like 2 weeks later, I remember it's my day off, and he texts me. He's like, hey man, I'm gonna be at my storage unit. I know the past few times haven't gone like to plan. He's like, but I will be there, I promise. Like, do you want to come through today and we can like finish this deal up? And the thing about like my days off is I live about an hour away from my store. So, you know, he is someone that lives near the store. So we're talking about like I would have to basically do a 2-hour round trip just to like go potentially buy his video games or get stood up. And I remember I was just like, dude, I feel like there's a good chance he stands me up, but like, why would he even text me and call me at this point? So I was like, all right, the final straw. I will go out and I will see if we can actually do this deal. I go to the parking lot of the storage unit. Dude flakes on me for the 3rd time, and I'm just like, I know at this point it's my fault, and I'm just like, dude, I hate this dude so much. Like literally every time afterwards, you would walk into my store, I would literally like just give him the cold shoulder. I'd be so annoyed to deal with him. Like I still to this day don't get how he comes to my store and he doesn't realize like why I'm like so cold towards him when he like literally just wastes my time. And these video games, this storage unit of video games, I have never heard of it since. Like, I don't know where you offloaded it supposedly. I'm convinced it never existed and he's just a compulsive liar. But the video games I've never heard about ever again. He'll show up again from time to time with random stuff. Like I remember one time the only good trade-in he's ever brought me was a Switch and a Mario Kart Double Dash CIB. And that was the only good trade-in he's ever brought me. I remember sometimes he'll call the store and he'll be like, sometimes I won't even know it's him. Like I said, I don't know his number. At this point, like I've literally taken him out of my cell phone. And when he calls the store, obviously, I don't recognize his number just from the number. And one time, like, not even one time, a few times he's called the store and be like, hey, like, I'm going to be there a little bit late. Like, is it cool if, like, you just stay open a little longer for me? And I'll be like, yeah, sure. Because, like, for me as a business owner, I'm like, if I stay open an extra 30, 40 minutes and I just make extra, like, income for the store, I have no issue with staying there longer. But the thing is, every single time this dude would call and ask me to stay open, I didn't know it was him. So I would stay open and the dude would show up with like the most dog trades and I would literally just want to pull my hair out and be like, oh my god, why did I stay here for this? You know, like I was thinking we were gonna sell stuff, not potentially like buy like awful stuff. Like this dude has shown up with like the grimiest PS1 controllers. One time he literally kept me open for an extra 40 minutes. He said he was going to be 10 minutes late. He wasn't. I just kept waiting. Showed up with the grimiest PS1 controllers. And I was like, dude, I don't want to take these. And then he was just like, come on, man. Not even for like a couple bucks. And I was like, no, not even for a couple dollars. I was like, honestly, like these are so disgusting. I don't think these are even like possible to like get to a condition where I would be happy selling them to a customer. He's like, come on, how about like $1 a piece? And I was like, no. I was like, literally, these will end up in my trash. I'm not going to pay you $1 a piece just to throw away controllers. He's like, how about like a quarter? And I was like, dude, at a quarter? I don't even want to do the paperwork with the police to like be able to sell this and like do the police report. I was like, no, I don't want to. He's like, okay, I'll just give them to you for free. And it's like, okay, cool. They'll just end up in my trash. like I was not kidding when I was telling him that they would just end up in my trash. I remember one time he showed up with like these Wii games. They were like decent, I guess. It was like Mario Baseball, Wii Sports, Mario Bros for the Wii, but they were obliterated. They were trashed beyond belief. And he wanted to sell them for cash, and I was just like, I'm literally gonna have to resurface all of these just to make sure that they're even working. And I was just like, man, I really cannot stand this guy. He'll come in sometimes with Wii Fit balance boards and be like, how much can you give me for my Wii Fit balance board? That's all he'll show up with. I'll be like, bro, what are you on about? Like, he'll literally just show up with like the worst stuff I've ever seen. And it's like I said, I know that's kind of how like retro video games is, and like, you know, this kind of like business model is, but like this dude consistently will almost exclusively bring me awful stuff. Like it'll be like disgusting or just completely worthless or just like not even stuff related to video games. Like sometimes he'll try and give me like Blu-rays, and I remember one time when I think it was the time that I was resurfacing all his games, he had like a taser and he started playing with the taser in my store, and I was like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy, bro? Like, this literally is so bizarre. And he's like, hey man, like, do you want to buy this? And I was like, no. I was like, I am a retro video game store. I was like, there is no way the police are gonna like not question why on my police report it says I bought a taser. And then he was like, oh no man, it can be for like personal use, you don't have to like resell it in your store. And I was like, dude, I'm not buying your taser. And he literally just he was sitting in my chair and playing with it, and I was like, dude, what is wrong with this dude? Thankfully, he hasn't been into my store for a while. I think the last time I saw him was maybe a month or two ago. I remember the most recent time he brought me a Wii with no cables, no controllers. Like, I was rolling my eyes. I remember I didn't even want to buy. He's like, come on, man, I waited for my turn. Like, he was kind of guilt tripping me into buying it. I was just like, I really cannot stand this dude. Like, I remember every single time he's like coming, I just like think about all the times he stood me up, all the time he's like just like kind of like tried to pressure me into buying his dog items. And it's just like, man, get out of here. And when I look back about how he's just using a taser in my store, I was like, what is actually wrong with you as a human? Like, I was like, you are a literal adult, and all you do is stand up a dude that's like half your age and play with a taser in his store. I was like, this dude is beyond whack. But yeah, that's two of the more notable stories I have. I have more. Maybe I'll make this like a weekly series. I'm not sure if I can sustain a weekly series of my weird interactions, but I'm sure if I mingle in like my Facebook Marketplace stories with like stories like this, I can definitely like get some content out of it. But yeah, thanks for checking out the video, guys, and I'll see you guys soon.